Lord, the former NATO boss George Robertson claims Scottish independence would be cataclysmic for the Western world. Fair comment or offensive scaremongering? We question the Labour peer. And we look into a new book promising voters an objective perspective on the key referendum issues. A yes vote in Scotland's independence referendum would have a cataclysmic impact in the West, and the forces of darkness would simply love it. That stark warning from the former NATO Secretary-General Lord George Robertson has provoked an angry response from the Scottish Government, which branded the comments crass and offensive. The Labour peer made his claims during a speech in Washington, while the First Minister was on a visit to New York. In a few moments, Lord Robertson talks to Scotland Tonight, but first here's STV's political correspondent, Claire Stewart.
America, it seems, has become the new front in the independence battle.
In the great city of New York.
Alex Salmond has been on a Tartan Week charm offensive, saying even if Scots don't vote yes in September, the nation will eventually be independent.
There is a trend which perhaps tells you that the timing is a matter of debate, but the destination, I think, is pretty well set.
But in Washington, a former Secretary-General of the nuclear alliance NATO issued dire warnings of the consequences independence could have on the stability of the world.
The loudest cheers for the breakup of Britain would be from our adversaries and from our enemies. For the second military power in the West to shatter this year would be cataclysmic in geopolitical terms. Nobody should underestimate the effect all of that would have on existing global balances, and the forces of darkness would simply love it.
Back in Scotland, the former Defence Secretary's claims were dismissed by the Deputy First Minister.
George Robertson's comments are not only insulting and offensive to people in Scotland, they just fly in the face of reality. And I guess, George Robertson himself in years to come will probably in his heart of hearts regret using such intemperate and over-the-top language.
However, Better Together defended Lord Robertson's intervention.
If he has used strong language, I think it is because he believes passionately what he is saying, and I think we would all be wise to listen to that case.
Scotland's referendum hasn't been hitting the headlines much in America, but the superpower is bound to take an interest in a vote which could change the makeup of a nation which it has a special relationship with.
Well, shortly before we came on air, Lord Robertson spoke to us from Washington. Lord Robertson, if Scotland became independent, it would be the democratic will of the people. How could that possibly be cataclysmic?
The decision is for the Scottish people, but it has consequences outside of Scotland, outside of the United Kingdom. If the United Kingdom was to break up, which is what Scotland seceding from the Union means, then it would mean the breakup of Britain and the breakup of the fourth largest economy in the world and the second military power in the West. So it would have dramatic implications well beyond Scotland's borders, even although that is a decision that will be democratically taken by the Scottish people. But it can't be taken assuming that nobody's going to notice or it won't have an effect.
Are you saying that the Scottish people should be considering world stability when making their decision then? Surely Scotland's not that influential.
The United Kingdom is influential and Scotland is influential inside the United Kingdom. If Britain was to break up, that would have ramifications. You know, I'm not asking anything special. I'm not suggesting anything completely remarkable. I'm simply asking the Scottish people to bear in mind the fact that the breakup of Britain would have international implications. We are a part of the West, that is the democratic value-based societies in the world, and at a time when the world is fraught and where there are all sort of crises round about us, the breakup of Britain would be noticed and would have consequences. So the Scottish people need to bear that in mind. It might not change their mind, but it would be entirely wrong if we based on domestic considerations without remembering that there are wider implications as well.
You say it's a reasonable point to make, but you do so in very robust language. As I say, cataclysmic. You talk of forces of darkness. Some people say that that's crass and offensive language.
Well, the nationalists would think that anything I said was crass and offensive. That's the way they deal with arguments. You know, why don't they actually take on the argument that I make instead of picking on words that I've used? I'm simply saying that if the United Kingdom was to break up, then it would break up one of the anchors of Western stability in the world today, and that is bound to have implications for stability in the world as a whole. But it's characteristic of the way in which this debate is being conducted by the nationalists that every time that somebody comes out with an argument based on knowledge and experience, they simply say that it's bluster and it's scaremongering without addressing the point that is being made. If they've got an argument with me, why don't they make it? Why don't they actually say whether they agree that this breakup of Britain would have implications for the rest of the world, instead of just abusing me?
But they're not abusing you necessarily. Surely language and tone is important. They say that you've done a disservice to the debate by using these words, forces of darkness, cataclysmic.
The world is a complicated place at the present moment. You only have to look at what's happening in Syria, in the East China Sea, in the centre of Africa. You only have to look what's happening in Ukraine at this very moment to recognise how fragile the world is that we live in at the present moment. The United Kingdom is very much part of the stable, predictable part of the world that is called the West. So if Britain was to break up and we were to spend our time in the UK as a whole, spending the next 2 or 3 years negotiating about the split of national assets or the line in the North Sea or how you picked out Scottish regiments from the British Army, then we will not be participating in what are momentous international events. So I'm not using language as a weapon. If they want to criticise me, ignore the language and actually address the fact that the debate in Scotland is not simply about Scotland and people being £500 a year better off. It's also to do with an outside world that we're intimately connected with and which would be affected if a decision was taken to split up Britain.
You were speaking in Washington. Is it your aim to persuade the United States administration to come out against Scottish independence?
Well, I hope that countries who recognise the geostrategic effects of this debate will say loudly and clearly that they want the United Kingdom to stay together, because I talk to people. I used to deal with heads of government and heads of state, so I do like to think that perhaps I know a little bit of what I'm talking about. And most people, when it's put to them, say that they don't want the United Kingdom to break up, especially.
But the US's official position is that it's neutral, Lord Robertson.
For the world.
The US position is that it's neutral.
Yeah, the US and other governments say that they're neutral because most of them don't believe that there is any likelihood of it happening. So I'm not calling upon them to change their mind. I'm not calling on foreign governments to intervene in the debate. I'm simply saying that if there are leaders in the world who recognise how important the role of the United Kingdom is and who would deplore the fact that Britain was broken up, should perhaps express a view about it. I can't dictate, I can't even suggest. All I'm saying is I'm warning people that there are broader implications of what we're doing on the 18th of September.
You did say in 1995 that devolution would kill nationalism stone dead, and that clearly didn't happen. With respect, why should people respect your predictions on independence?
Well, it didn't kill nationalism stone dead since then, and these were words that I used at the time, and I've yet to be proved wrong. It may well be that devolution will kill this aspect of Scottish nationalism that demands secession from the United Kingdom and the breakup of Britain. Time alone is going to tell about that. But rather than this being thrown at me at the present moment? Why don't they address the major points that I'm making? You know, I remember when the SNP were saying free by 93. I remember a lot of slogans in the past, like a penny for Scotland. That was in the past. What I'm talking about now are major repercussions that will happen in the world if Scotland secedes from the Union and Britain breaks up. So I hope that the Nationalists will address that serious point and not simply resort to the usual abuse that they use when anybody comes on that they disagree with.
Lord Robertson in Washington. Well, we're now joined by the SNP MSP Stuart Maxwell. Lord Robertson is a former Defence Secretary, a former Secretary-General of NATO. He surely knows what he's talking about.
Well, what's interesting is that somebody who has held, quite rightly as you say, held such very senior positions both in the UK government and on the international stage should be so, let's be nice about it, naive in the language that he's used here. He's used inflammatory language, he's used insulting language to, I think, the whole of Scotland, not just the Yes campaign here, that somehow a democratic decision taken by the people of Scotland in their own best interests in a mature democracy, agreed by both the UK government and the Scottish government in a process that's fair and of the highest standard, somehow would create world tension and instability and cataclysmic outcomes. That is just ridiculous, inflammatory and frankly nonsensical.
He does make the point, though, that you should look beyond the language and actually to the substance of the argument he's making, and that it could destabilise the UK and Western stability generally.
Well, no, I think if he wanted to make serious points, he should have made them in a serious way. But on the central issue, he's made the point we should deal with the central issue. Let's deal with it. There will be impacts. There will be positive impacts for the rest of the UK and extremely positive impacts for Scotland and other nations. We all joined the family of nations around the world as a peaceful, mature democracy. We will have shown the proper way to deal with our differences in a democratic and peaceful and agreed fashion. That's an excellent example for the rest of the world. And then we'll go on to work with our partners, both in defence matters and in other matters. And I think actually it will be a tremendous impact, a positive impact that we'll have on the world.
Should, as Lord Robertson suggests, Scottish voters think of world stability when they're about to cast their vote in the independence referendum?
Well, I just don't accept his analysis. I think his analysis is so deeply flawed, it's laughable. The idea that, on the one hand, we've been told by the No campaign that if Scotland becomes independent, we would be so insignificant, we'd have no role in the world, no influence in the world. And at the same time we've got Lord Robertson telling us that if we do just that, suddenly we'll destabilise the Western world and there'll be cataclysmic repercussions for the West and other parts of the world. This is nonsense. You cannot have it both ways, and the No campaign really should get their story straight.
The United States and the United Kingdom do have a special relationship. That would be undermined, would it not, by breaking up the United Kingdom? No,
we're not breaking up Britain, as Lord Robertson said. Britain's an island and Britain will stay there. What we're breaking up here, what we're changing, is the political union. We want to end the political union, and what we'll have in its place are two friendly neighbours working together with their partners around Europe and around the world. And we have been a long-term friend of the US for many hundreds of years now, and that will continue after independence.
But nonetheless, the United States are likely to prefer stability. Bigger organisations, nations tend to prefer that. And although they say they're neutral, would they not prefer stability?
Well, I don't think I can speak for the US government, and I don't think Lord Robertson can speak for the US government. However, President Obama and the US Secretary of State, John Kerry, can speak for the US government, and they've said they're neutral. They take no position on this. It's a matter for the Scottish people to take. But they've also said, as John Kerry said very clearly, he held up the Scottish democratic process in this referendum as a shining example of how it should be done. I think the US people will look on this process as a sensible process that's being undertaken in a democratic way. And at the end of that process, after independence, they will see that not only do they have friends in the rest of the UK, but they have a new friend in Scotland.
You can see where he's coming from, or in terms of an independent Scotland, maybe less secure, arguably, if there are ongoing arguments about defence and all the rest of it. Scotland almost being a back door, if you like. There are people who sincerely hold that view.
Well, there's no doubt there are people who have different views about the outcome of the referendum. There are people who have different views for different reasons about why that would be the case. But the fact remains that we've laid out in the White Paper a very clear policy on defence. We believe that we should be a member of NATO, so that we work with all of our allies, though 20 other countries, to make sure that military alliance makes sure that the people of Scotland and the rest of the people of the Western world are safe in their beds at night. But not only that, that we are a positive influence in NATO. We were a non-nuclear company, so that we get rid of nuclear weapons from Scotland, and we push for a positive non-nuclear defence, which is actually in line with the kind of problems we face in the 21st century. Trident will never deal with international terrorism, and we need a defence force and a defence policy that's aimed at the problems that Scotland and the rest of the Western world face, not the problems of the mid-20th century.
Stuart Maxwell, thanks for joining us on Scotland Tonight. Thank you.